Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the geopolitical alignments, and especially we'll be focusing on the visit of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Remember, this is his second visit after the Ukrainian war, and he visited Iran, not only met the Supreme Leader, Mr. Khamenei, and the President, Mr. Raisi, but also another important invitation was given to the Turkish President, Mr. Tayyip Erdogan, and interestingly, he was there as well. So he held some very important meetings, and then a couple of very important areas were discussed in which the Syrian rebels, obviously one party is supporting one group, the other Russians are supporting the adversary, issues in Libya, the support for their government, the blockade of the grains export from Ukraine was also discussed, perhaps the oil prices issue and the supply, because on one side Iran is also a rival of Russia when it comes to the supply of oil. Those areas were also discussed. When you talk about the certain rebel groups that are also in Kurdistan, in the Turkish area as well as in the Iranian area, that also came under discussion. And other than that, couple of issues that also included the supply of drones from Iran to Russia. That was also one of the primary, I would say, concerns. And then the reaction from the CIA director, Mr. William Burns, was primarily to undermine the very important visit of the Russian president to Iran, where he said that a lot of trust deficit is still there, they need to move on, but there are a lot of hurdles also. And the United States of America is keeping a very close eye on this particular visit. So obviously the Russians at the same time wanted to tell the world that they are not alone. Perhaps they have got the regional partners with them, just like Turkey as well as Iran and a couple of other countries as well. But let's see what exactly is the outcome. But at the same time, another very huge development is from Gazprom, the leading oil and gas company in Russia, in fact signed a deal worth $40 billion with Iran. So what sort of areas will be looked after according to the deal? Is it only going to be about the supply of oil, or perhaps some sort of support from the Russians to the Iranians when it comes to the machinery, when you talk about the oil extraction? So that is also something very important, and perhaps we are also talking about some sort of refineries in that particular deal. Now, secondly, we all know that there is a lot of sanction on Iran as well as on Russia. So how to in fact move forward considering those obstacles, those hindrances, those issues and those problems? We'll be talking about that as well. So perhaps a three-way summit meeting in Tehran between the leaders of Russia, Iran and Turkey sent a very clear-cut signal that Vladimir Putin is pushing back against this pressure by the West. And interestingly, the Iranian Supreme Leader very categorically mentioned that it wasn't the fault of the Russians, rather the West should be blamed for it. They in fact brought this war right in the porch of the Russian president, and this is what he has been saying as well. Now, to talk about that, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio on my right is Dr. Shamsi Saab. He's expert on foreign affairs and representing CASS. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. And on Skype from Iran, we have with us Mr. Ghanbar Naderi. He's a senior journalist. A pleasure to have you, sir. Thank you very much for your time. And we'll also be talking to Brigadier retired Nawaz Saab, who's a senior analyst, and he's going to join us on telephone. But sir, if you allow me, let me put the first question to our friend Ghanbar Naderi, who's a senior journalist in Iran. First of all, sir, I would like you to throw light on this very important historic visit of the Russian president. Obviously, it means a lot, not only for Iran, but also for the entire regional countries. Whereas William Burns, the director of CIA, has undermined the visit of the Russian president. Now, what we have learned that issues like Syria and Libya, PKK, grains supply to the world, oil supply issues, they all were the major area of concern. Your take, sir?
Well, as you know better than me, Iran and Russia have been cooperating with each other on many fronts, including the war in Syria, uh, uh, many financial and banking transactions, exchange of technology, especially when it comes to nuclear power and power generation, and so on and so forth. The only difference this time is that Iran is going to also help Russia to bypass sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies for the simple fact that Iran has become an expert in bypassing this kind of economic restrictions and pressures when it comes to exporting oil and gas and importing technology or as simple as buying essential goods and services for domestic consumption. So Russia has come to Iran, has sent its Putin to Iran because they don't know how to bypass sanctions, and this is going to add to the rest of the high level of cooperation that has been going on between these two neighbors for the past 3 decades or so. So a lot is at stake at the moment, and we know that this is not just about cooperation or bypassing sanctions. This is also about multilateralism and the new world order. It has been around for some time. The only difference this time is that it is being made public, that America is no longer calling the shots in the region and beyond, that this is no longer just a one power that is controlling everything on this planet of ours, and that this is now about multilateralism and the rule of international law. Of course, America, the political class in Washington, and some of their allies in Europe still refuse to accept this irrefutable fact, but this is inevitable.
All right. Now coming to you, Ziasab, important areas of discussion, technology. That is something which the Iranians have been seeking for a very long time. On top, we have also learned that perhaps the Iranian drones, I was surprised, we always talk about the Turkish drones, but Iranian drones could be sold to Russia. And on top, if Gazprom, just one company, is planning to invest $40 billion in that particular oil and gas sector, that is going to give a lot of boost to the Iranian energy supply, number one. And secondly, is there another important area, because every single country has their own political agenda in the region. Whether you talk about Syria, you talk about Libya, you talk about Russia, you talk about Turkey, or perhaps you talk about Iran. Now, this realignment, that seems to be something pretty obvious now. Your take, sir.
Thank you very much, Faisal, for inviting me over. Very, very important topic. In fact, if you look at it from whichever angle you want, it is a new world order 2. I have written on it. I think I wrote my first piece some 3 months back on the subject, that realignments, and it is going to be globalization versus regionalization. Like, Americans never thought that their Afghanistan campaign will last for over 2 decades and they would end up spending more than $1 trillion. And in the meantime, China would cross them on many fronts. For example, by 2028 perhaps, China would become the largest economy. Okay? And perhaps US strategists missed that Russia in the process would consolidate itself in a manner that it would rise to challenge Americans' supremacy in the region. So just look at the alignments now, that China and Russia are making friends within the region, whereas Americans are making friends in the extra-regional areas. For example, I2U2, India, Israel, US, UAE. Okay? Quad, US, India, Japan, and Australia. AUKUS, US, Australia, UK. So just look at the alignments. Whereas if you look within the region, you will straight away find out that it is Turkey, Iran, China, Russia. Pakistan would have been there had the changes that have really changed Pakistan had not taken place 3-4 months back. Otherwise, the Pakistan perhaps would have been here as the fourth country.
So the
in this.
former Prime Minister, Mr. Imran Khan, always said that we do not believe in the politics of blocks. So
I'm not hinting at forming a bloc. I am hinting at cooperative engagement, productive engagement. Because just look at the countries who are involved here. Turkey, FATF, isn't it? Iran, heavily sanctioned, last 4 decades.
Blacklist
Russia,
of FATF.
sanctioned. So if you push the countries to the wall, then they tend to join together, isn't it?
Correct.
And that is what is happening at the moment. So even if you do not call it a bloc, you will have to call them some kind of cooperation which may result into productive engagement, isn't it? Why? Because all these the result of this productive engagement is being projected in so many contracts, so many agreements, and all of them are of commercial interest, isn't it?
economic diplomacy.
Economic diplomacy.
Correct.
Why? Because they are not finding the way out. If you do not give me a way out, I will even shake hand with the enemy, isn't it? Because I have to survive. I have to survive, and if I have somebody stronger enough in my backyard, why should I go Saat Samandar Par? Isn't it?
That makes a lot of sense,
So
yes.
that is what is happening. America is still trying to exert its influence globally, whereas Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, they are all trying to find productive engagement with their regional partners. And perhaps the survival lies in regionalism instead of globalization.
Now, another point that I want you to throw light on is that Turkey is a member of NATO, not a member of European Union. Certain countries like Finland or Sweden, perhaps they are a member of European Union, but not a member of NATO. Maybe at some stage they do, choose to become, but it has its own repercussions as well. Now, sir, when you talk about a NATO member country which has a very strong army, in the past, what we have witnessed that, if you remember, there was this F-16 which shot down a Russian MiG also, and both the pilots were killed. So there were tensions, and certainly the tourism into Turkey from Russia almost came to a halt, and around $10 billion worth of tourism was only taking place from Russia. And then what did we witness? We saw that there were a lot of bomb blasts in so many cities, and we all thought, oh, no, Turkey should have thought twice, before taking such a decision. But now, sir, I think wisdom prevails in Turkey, and interestingly, Mr. Tayyip Erdogan believes in no sanctions on Russia. They are also trying to make sure that the grain supply should resume soon, because there's going to be a major grain crisis, food crisis perhaps. Overall, I mean, look at these 50, 60 countries which import wheat or barley, or for that matter, edible oil, corn, maize. I mean, there's so many interesting aspects to look into. So that means that, most of these NATO members or European Union members still do not 100% believe in what the Americans want them to do. Because at the end of the day, America is pretty far away from Russia, sir. If you look at that huge Atlantic Ocean in between, and then Europe and then Russia. But talking about the European countries, you can't pick up a certain country, for example, Poland or Romania, and place them in Africa just to be away from Russia. Russia is a reality at the end of the day. So do you think, sir, at some stage we will see the negotiations are being held, or you believe that this war which is lingering on, we all thought it will be over in a matter of weeks. It's been almost now, how many months? 7 months? 6 months?
Yeah,
February onwards?
They've entered the 6 months.
Right, sir? So the point is that I think this engagement of the Russians in Ukraine really suits the Americans.
Perhaps yes, but there is a difference. NATO is a military alliance, whereas EU is a political arrangement. So there is a difference. It is not necessary that an EU member will have to be a member of NATO. Number one. Number two, Russia did not go into war all by itself. It had been warning the US and its European allies since 2008.
Correct.
That do not bring NATO troops to my doorsteps, isn't it?
Correct.
It was promised by James Baker that NATO will not extend itself eastward, isn't it? However,
Commitment was done in 1989, if I'm not wrong, sir. Wall of Berlin.
92.
92.
92. However, it was not done. Okay, and slowly and gradually they started to expand eastward. There is a difference. Americans, Europeans, obviously the democratic countries, the government stays for 4 years, 8 years, 6 years or something. Look at the Russia and China. It is the continuity of leadership, isn't it?
Correct.
So whatever vision Mr. Putin had at that time in 2008, it was not there in the US administration at that time.
So there was this consistency in
There was
policies.
consistency. So he had been
Just
warning
like the
them.
Chinese model.
That's what I'm saying. Okay, this is the difference between Russia, China in political outlook versus the West. UK is changing its prime minister, I think, third prime minister within 3 years, 4 years.
Ma'am Theresa was there, and
Isn't
then
it?
Boris Johnson.
Isn't it?
And prior to that, yes.
Isn't it? So, even if the long term interest will not change, perhaps, because democratic societies, they do not change, but the handling and the execution would change, isn't it? Afghanistan situation, US situation in Afghanistan was entirely different under Trump, but when Biden came, it was a hasty withdrawal and he's been questioned about it, isn't it? On the other hand, Russians, they're consistent in their approach.
They were
in the vision.
negotiating with the Taliban way back.
So,
They
that's
were
what
not
I'm-
open talks, but everybody
That's
knew
what I'm-
what sort of a role the other countries are playing. Sir, let me also bring in now.
Sure.
Let me have the Iranian perspective. Now, sir, there is another story, Mr. Naderi, that Russia and Iran are also considering gradually removing the US dollar from the bilateral trade. There is a story that Indians and the Russians would be doing trade in ruble and rupee. The Chinese would be doing trade with the Russians in yuan and ruble. Iran could opt for something similar. So this kind of an arrangement, what is that supposed to mean for the Iranians in general, sir?
Well, as you know, the American dollar has been a huge headache, not just for Iran, but for Russia and many other developing nations, for the simple fact that America has the option of printing as much as money it can, and at the same time, other countries have no choice but see that the evaluation or depreciation of the value of their national currencies in which America wins and they always lose. This has been a huge problem for Iran. We know that we have runaway prices. We know that the prices are going through the roof. And we know that the value of the Iranian national currency is going down the drain. Why? Because we are unable, at least the regional countries have been unable to trade with their own currencies. Now the good news is that many countries have come to their senses that American dollar is not that much strong. It is not that much valuable or as valuable and more valuable than other national currencies. And why not? If you are selling oil to Russia, if you are selling oil to China, why not get the renminbi or ruble? Why not? I mean, who is going to stop you that? Now they are coming to their senses. Many politicians have now realized that there is no need to have American dollars in order to sell oil or to get the oil money back in American dollars. So this has been a long struggle between many countries in the region to somehow replace the American dollars, because not only do they see the depreciation of their national currencies, they also see that America uses this financial weapon. It manages to weaponize its dollars in order to impose financial sanctions and restrictions on the countries that are not on the same page with the United States and its global agenda. We see what is going on with Russia. They have been able to easily block Russian assets or confiscate and seize Russian assets in the Western markets and Western banks, and at the same time impose immense sanctions on Russia. You know that the sanctions imposed on Russia right now are much more than the ones that have been imposed on Iran since the past 4
But
decades.
it hasn't done that kind of a damage for the Russians.
Yeah,
Most of
well,
these currencies,
right.
including yen, Indian rupee, Pakistani rupee, Chinese yuan, even euro, British pound, they all got weakened against, except for one currency which almost gained 40%, that is ruble.
Yeah, that's the point. You just
Because of
put
the
it
reserves.
you put it in right direction. Why we haven't seen the sanctions succeed against Russia? Because many countries have not decided to side or support the American agenda against Russia. At the same time, many countries are trading in their own national currencies. So American dollar is not that strong as it used to be a couple of years or decades ago. So the tables have turned. As I told you, this is now the age of multilateralism, and international law, that in which not just one single country like the United States that is able to control geopolitical issues in the world. No, we have different countries, we have different regions with different agendas, and they are more than happy and willing and prepared to trade in their own national currencies and follow their own national and regional agenda. Why? Because the old world order doesn't work. It is not relevant anymore. It used to work some time ago, but the moment that America left Afghanistan, the whole world realized that America is its former self, is the shadow of its former self. American dollar is not strong. America is no longer a superpower. We have many different superpowers in the world, and that they can also have their own say. And we know that soon China is going to replace America as the greatest economy in the world. When that happens, we will see the death of American dollar and the birth of many national currencies in the region and beyond. This is good news, and this is exactly why, as you just put it so perfectly, this is why Western sanctions against Russia is not working.
Now, it's a quick comment before I go to Brigadier Haris Nawaz Saab. He has also joined us. A quick comment before that, and the question is that you remember that the Chinese had also committed around $400 billion to be invested in Iran. Whether it is about the infrastructure or it's about technology or it's about investment in certain fields. $400 billion in the next 25 years. What is the update on that account, sir?
That's a good question. You travel to Iran, you will see tens of thousands of Chinese nationals, technicians, bankers, financial officers that are going around the country. They are building roads. They have built roads. I have traveled on in one of these roads. It is magnificent. It stretches tens of kilometers, and it is connecting the northern part of the country with the southern part. It goes straight through the capital, Tehran. The Chinese are building ports infrastructure along the Persian Gulf. They are renting many different places. As I told you, just travel to Iran and you will see that the tables have turned. That's why Iran is not...
I would love to visit Iran, sir. I've never been to Iran, but what all we have heard about Iran is just out of the world. The kind of historical places they have, the kind of tourism industry, if they develop it. I still remember Mr. Rouhani, when he was the president, he went to Italy, and then from Italy he went to France, and he placed a huge order of almost 500 planes so that Tehran becomes the hub, just like Dubai or for that matter Istanbul. And they had the money, they had the potential, and I think they have got much more to offer as far as tourism is concerned.
Religious tourism.
And religious tourism, sir. Obviously, so many people from Pakistan, they travel to Iran and from all over the world, I would say. Now, Brigadier Sahab, Assalamu alaikum. Brigadier Haris, Assalamu alaikum ji.
Walaikum assalam, I can hear you.
Sir, good to have you in the program, sir. Thank you very much for your time. Brigadier Sahab, since you have a very close eye on the regional development and on certain strategic issues as well. Now, when you talk about the visit of the Russian president, Mr. Vladimir Putin, interestingly, this is the first trip by the president outside ex-Soviet territories. He was there in Kazakhstan also. That was his first visit after this Ukrainian war. Now, sir, how do you see this visit, this alignment of Turkey, Iran, and Russia? And because if you look at Pakistan historically, sir, Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey, they have been members of the CENTO, and they have got very close alliance. And on top, if you look at Pakistan, you know, from China all the way to Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey means that it's a gateway to Europe
RCD.
also. And
RCD.
right, sir. So tell us, sir, what do you make out once you see this historical visit? Because the Americans have undermined. They said that, you know, the Russians have got a lot of trust deficit with the Iranians, especially when it comes to the oil supply and certain other issues. Whereas Gazprom, just imagine, has signed a deal worth $40 billion. So if they were rivals, they would never have done that. Your take?
Faisal, one thing we must understand, it's not only Iran, then of course Turkey and Russia. I would count it that inbuilt there are also China and later stage Pakistan, because that is what becomes a total regional approach, which I always say, yeah, that you have to be very strong in your regional relations, because that affects you economically, then of course all prevailing international environments when you see it. And particularly this further is more important because, you know, if why Putin has come all the way from Russia to Iran, that means, one, they want to have a big gas contract. Of Gazprom, they have got a big corporation, and Iran, they're having a contract, so they have come for that. And after that, then of course, they want basically NATO member is Turkey. So there is the first time they're making a NATO member who is now going to go back and they will try to convince a NATO member that the world, particularly Africa, is going to have a big shortage of food. And that is the reason they want that it should be helped to extricate food from the Ukrainian port to the other Caspian Sea and all other places they have to Baltic Sea. Now that is the main issue. After that, of course, Russia supported Iran for revival of the same nuclear contract which is already in doldrums, and they want it should be. We must hold it. It should never go anywhere else. That was the issue. And then, of course, more important is that Syrian issue was also there because there Iran and Russia and Turkey, they're all directly involved. So they wanted to have a mutual understanding because Turkey had a problem. Turkey, Kurdish, they want a 30 kilometers buffer zone.
Even in Libya, sir. Even in Libya.
Yeah, yes, in Libya also. So these are the things which are very important. But I think the Russians are more concerned to get port cleared for grain transportation to the Africa and to the other side, including Pakistan, because otherwise these regions are going to have a big shortage of food grain and will cause a lot of unrest problem. And United Nations also requested that at least that port should be open for all these grain.
Now, another important factor that the Russian spokesperson, Mr. Dmitry Peskov, in fact, issued a very interesting statement when he was talking to an Iranian journalist. He said that Russia could soon sign a treaty on strategic cooperation that would expand their collaboration in banking and finance. Now, that is something super important, sir. That means that the Russians really are looking forward for having a long-term and a very strong strategic partnership.
And that too, they want to have it because then they want to have a ruble and then of Iranian currency, they want to do the business. And remember, always behind is the China. China has $400 billion contract with Iran. That means their all concerns are mutual. And that is becoming a very good regional cooperation. And this should cause concern Americans because now Americans are facing big problems. Americans are not being properly welcomed by even European Union and NATO countries because I think they're in trouble. They have a big
absolute trouble.
They are shifting to coal, and it is a big hypocrisy when you say pollution and so many things doing it, and now they're all reverting to coal. That means they're not pushed. They've been talking about rhetorics when we say that it is going to have a pollution and green, what all they've been talking about, and they are reverting it. So, and there's a big shortage of gas going to be in winter. They are always saying rationing of gas. But there is a big business between Americans, because Americans were never happy that whole of Europe was not shifting and drifting for gas and petroleum towards Russia.
I
And
totally
that was
agree,
big
sir.
cause of concern.
Interestingly, I'll just give you an example, Brigadier Saab, that looking at the demand by the European Union, when you talk about energy, primarily petroleum, gas, and on top coal, three major components. Now, if you look at the prices of these commodities, sir, and just compare them with the last year, Zia Saab, the price of this LNG has increased 10 times, 10 times, 10 folds. Whereas when you talk about coal, 5 times. So that is not going to be feasible for the European countries. When you're talking about energy crisis of that level, people are not used to that. And on top, what will happen is that there is going to be a global recession, which is broaching, which is right around the corner, and that is going to create a lot of problem. Now, one more quick comment, sir, from Zia Saab, is that Germany, let's take the example of Germany, dependence of, dependence on coal, gas, and the kind of infrastructure they have and everything. No matter what Qatar does, no matter what Americans do, limited quantity, more cost, is incurring because of the transportation, and everything has multiplied because of the COVID. Now, sir, tell me one thing. Just for the sake of the American interest, do you think the European countries will practically put them where they are, the way the euro has weakened also?
Never. And I wish Angela Merkel was still there.
What a wise woman.
I wish. Otherwise, just look at the leadership around.
If
in
she was
Europe.
there, I think Russia wouldn't even have attacked Ukraine.
So, just look at the leadership around. On Monday, you could have a reverse colonization if Mr. Sunak becomes the Prime Minister of UK. He's in the final now, isn't it? And
Yes.
he may.
You never know.
You never know, isn't it? So, what do you expect out of the European leadership? The Macron is re-elected, isn't it, for
Yes.
next 6 years or something. The point is, what I am making is the consistency in leadership and its vision versus regular rollover of the European leaders who are not that competent, who are not that bold, and who are not that independent in their own decision making because of the American influence on European countries. That is the difference. And remember, the COVID is not yet over. The food crisis that will take place because of this war, as it gets prolonged, although I have been advising Mr. Putin that the protracted wars are counterproductive for the offensive element. But he has its own agenda, and he had been preparing himself for this war because he could see that it is coming. He had been warning Europe not to expand eastward. He prepared himself politically, and that is why China is standing like a rock behind. He prepared economically, is a vast and huge reserves in every currency, and that is why he had been modernizing his military also, and he is choosing his path into the heartland of Ukraine, expanding all the time towards westward at will. I mean, he could have taken over Kyiv, but he decided to withdraw because he perhaps didn't want that much of bloodshed. But he is now expanding towards south also and expanding west also. And rest assured, he is not going to evacuate the territory that he
has already captured.
Sir,
when the annexation of Crimea took place in 2014, almost, now it's been 8 years, it seems as if it was yesterday.
Absolutely.
Now the interesting part is that even then the Americans were actually planning to sort of support the European countries and in particular Ukraine to go after. And then, we all witnessed that regime change, and Mr. Volodymyr, the Zelensky, came to power and everything, and out of nowhere. And interestingly, because, if you remember, he played a role of the president, but he was a comedian.
Yeah,
and interestingly, Vladimir Putin, who has been the head of KGB, who is a black belt, who has served in the military, who has been the prime minister, who has been the president, and this man means business.
Yeah.
He has never taken Zelensky seriously, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And moreover, the point is here that he is moving as per his plan. I mean, just imagine when Prime Minister Imran Khan was there, the day of attack had already been decided, and that is why he did not even care
that who's visiting or not,
that somebody is visiting us, isn't it? So he
and
is
if you
moving
remember,
as
prior
per
to
plan.
that, the Americans were giving and issuing statements that you will see soon the offensive is going to be launched by the Russians. They already knew it, because you can't do it overnight. Obviously, there's a plan. There is a military asset movement. We all, in fact,
it was already planned.
Yeah. Now, coming to you, Mr. Naderi, another important point that I want you to sort of clear to us. If you remember, Mr. Biden, his first visit to Israel, and right after that he was in Saudi Arabia, where he met the crown prince as well as the king of Saudi Arabia. Held a couple of important meetings. On certain issues, he wasn't very well prepared, I would say. Very half-hearted kind of statements were issued. But right after that, the Russian visit to Iran, I think that also is very important. I mean, two almost superpowers visiting two countries which are adversaries in one way or the other. Now, what is that supposed to mean for the region, and in particular for a country like Pakistan, which are friends with almost all these four countries?
Well, that's a good question. As it is said, you can choose your friends and enemies, but you cannot choose your neighbors. These countries are neighbors. They have no choice, no option but to work together, to respect their security and prosperity and interests, and of course, concerns. Many countries in the region have common interests and mutual security concerns. They have no choice but to work together. They know much better than anyone else that when the going gets tough, America is going to leave them alone to their own devices. Look at what happened to Afghanistan. Americans left it to its own devices, and people are now suffering. The other countries in the region took lessons from that historic, defeat of the failure of the United States government and the military complex in Afghanistan. They don't want to see a repeat of that in their own or along their own borders. That's why the trip by Biden and his administration officials to Saudi Arabia and the region was a huge disaster for the United States and its allies. And this trip and the consequent trip by Biden and Erdogan to Iran has been evaluated as a success. I think we are going to see much more cooperation between the regional countries. I do believe and I do hope that they have already come to their senses and realized that when it comes to sorting out their differences and common security concerns, they are much better off depending on each other to sit down at the same negotiating tables and sort out their concerns and differences through dialogue, because there is no other way around. America is not going to save them. America didn't save its allies. Even Saudi Arabia has also realized that America will always leave you when the going gets tough, and America did that. It stopped sending weapons to Saudi Arabia because of the war in Yemen. But now they are trying to somehow get back to the game. America wants to say that I'm still in the region. No, you are not in the region anymore. You have left the region. The regional countries have realized that they can live without you and they can ensure their own security without the help of the United States and occupying military regime. And that is exactly what is going to happen. What happened, and that's exactly what Biden heard behind closed doors in Saudi Arabia.
All right. Now, last question to you, Brigadier Saab. And if you remember, sir, there is this very confusion sort of an atmosphere that prevails in Syria, in Kurdish areas of Turkey. Whether you talk about the presence of Daesh or PKK or other rebels, in certain cases, certain groups are supported by the Russians. where their adversaries are supported by the Turkish. Now the statement that was issued interestingly said that all the three countries, Iran, Turkey and Russia, they have agreed to work together. There's a mutual understanding now between the Russians and the Turkish authorities, and they have blamed the Western involvement for all the wrongdoings in that particular region. Now, sir, tell us do you think if these three countries unite and work together to eliminate terrorism from that particular region, sir, the Americans will still have their proxies there? And if that is the case, then the trouble is not going to end.
Faisal, that's the basic reason. One of the reasons why these three countries were together in Iran, because they have got a mutual interest, one. Second, they have not declared, but I'm sure they must have reached to a mutual conclusion that how they're going to deal in Syria against all Americans and those rebels who are being supported by Europe and America. So that they must have reached to a certain conclusion. I'm sure outcome is going to show us. They must have allowed Turkey to operate in 30 kilometers buffer zone, and then they control Kurdish, whatever they are doing it. And I'm sure Iran must have agreed, because now Iran needs Turkey and Iran needs Russia and China, and I would say even Pakistan, to get a lot of support, which we have been isolated by the Americans and Israelis, and their recent visit to Saudi Arabia also. But you must have seen how Saudis have behaved and given a cold shoulder to American Biden president. That he was brought to Jeddah, then who received him, then how he was treated over there. So these are the things the Americans have realized, that they are being isolated and their policy has not been acknowledged. And the most important is that the whole crisis of Ukraine have been created by Americans. Because Russians have been warning and requesting Americans and NATO, please don't expand towards eastern side. And then they had brought the whole monitoring equipment in Russia. 25 biological factories, all things were there. So that was the reason I think Russia wanted to go immediately war before Ukraine become member of NATO.
All right. All right. Thank you very much, Brigadier Haris Nawaz, for your presence, sir, and for your comments in our program. I would also like to thank Mr. Naderi for his time and his presence in our show, and always a pleasure to have you, Zia Sahab, in the program. So that's all we have for this hour and for this week. Inshallah, I'll see you on Monday at 8:05 p.m. Till then, you take care of yourself. Have a great weekend. Khuda Hafiz.